The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Getting the Best from the Performance Reviews webinar. I'm Ria Sheridan. I'm your Professional Development Advisor at CIWM and your Chair and your question host for today's webinar. Well, before I introduce you to today's panellists, I've got a little bit of housekeeping for you. And I would like to point out that your microphones are on mute, but you're still able to ask questions. And you can do this by typing these into the question box on the bottom of your grey dashboard on your screen. You are encouraged to do this at any point by asking questions throughout the webinar, and your questions are not public. They can only be seen by the organisers, so you don't need to worry about asking what you think might be a difficult question. If you do lose your grey dashboard at any point, there's a little orange arrow at the top corner of your dashboard that will show and hide it. And if you manage to minimise or lose your whole webinar presentation screen, just click on the little blue flower at the taskbar at the bottom of your monitor, and that will make it come back again. The session is being recorded, so a link to this will be shared with you via email tomorrow. Don't worry about trying to take lots of notes. You'll be able to revisit a video of the slides and audio at your leisure. Audience questions. Now they're going to be put to the panellists after each presentation during the webinar. This will give you a chance to type them into the question box as you think of them, but we do ask that you submit them throughout rather than waiting to the end so that your questions aren't missed. We will endeavour to answer as many questions as the time allows, and if we've got time at the end, what we're going to do is have a general Q&A with the panel. There are some leaflets for you to download as well while you're on the webinar, and you can find these by clicking on the handouts section on your dashboard. There's a little grey line that says handouts, and if you click on there, there's some PDF copies that you can save as you're going along. The webinar's audience participation, you are going to be asked for your opinions throughout just to make sure that you're paying attention, and it will be in the form of some multiple choice polls. When a question comes up on your screen, you'll have about 30 to 40 seconds to tick an answer you want to make and then click submit. If after the webinar anybody feels like they need more detailed information on the webinar topic or other relevant topics and subjects, we're more than happy to provide you with further details. The panelist names, contact details, etc. will appear on a screen at the end, and I'll leave that up so you have time to jot down those names. But as I said, you will get a link to the recording so you can revisit those names at the end. After the webinar closes, there will be a very brief multiple choice survey. This will pop up automatically when you log out. And I say very brief, it's 5 questions, tick box, and a box for your opinions. Do take a couple of minutes to tell us what you think. Your views are genuinely very important to us. So, without further ado, I'm just going to introduce you to your panellists. You can see on your screen there, we've got some photos. It's nice to put a face to a name. We have Caroline Robertson from ActifHR, Maggie Clinton from Wrenwell Limited, and Maggie Newton from Clematis Coaching Services. The sessions in today's webinar are going to be performance management, getting the best out of the process, delivered by Caroline Robertson, disc profiling, personality profiling by Maggie Newton, and managing pressure to improve performance by Maggie Clinton. So remember, this is an audience participation webinar, and your typed questions are welcome throughout. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our first panellist, Caroline Robertson from ActifHR, for her presentation. However, first of all, Caroline's got a question that she'd like to ask you. I'm going to ask you to actually have a look at this poll question. And if you could put your choice of how often do you carry out performance reviews and appraisals in your organisation. If you could tick the one that you like and press submit, I'm going to give you all a few seconds to have a look at that question. How often are performance reviews carried out within your organisation? Okay, we've got quite a lot of answers in here already. Most people have voted, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. Well, that's not surprising. Many companies only do it once a year. Once every 6 months is very good. We don't do them at all. That's actually quite low. I expected a few more than that, but it's surprising to see that there aren't many people that review it on an ongoing basis. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand you over now to Caroline Robertson, CEO of ActifHR.
Good afternoon. It's Caroline Robertson from ActifHR. We're a human resource and employment law consultancy business based at Silverstone Park, and I qualified as a solicitor nearly 20 years ago and have run an HR business over 15 years. So it's interesting to see that most of you do performance reviews and appraisals. That's a good start. I'm just going to Can you help me just move on? Thank you. Performance management. It's one of the key issues employers ask me to advise on. So it's all the knowledge built up and tips over the last 20 years. So in the brief time, I'll be looking at how to set good performance in motion, dealing with poor performance when it strikes, and the procedure a business needs to be seen to go through. Sorry, are you able to take me back one? Thank you. That's it. I realise some managers find performance management a pain. It would be great if everyone did the job to the standard expected of them. Any manager who's never had to performance manage, if they claim they've never done that, they're probably not doing their job properly, or they've got superhuman employees or low expectations. Performance management begins on day one with recruitment, of course, getting the right people. However, it's important to fine-tune employees to fit the organisation. You must instill your ideas on performance, the ground rules, your contractual obligations, the workplace ethos. And a company induction is vital through the induction and probationary period to set goals and monitor and appraise. And larger businesses train their managers to do this properly. Managers sometimes see performance reviews as identifying issues to maybe just rap an employee across the knuckles. However, it's part of a much wider process to say to an employee when they're also doing a good job and set standards. I'm shocked by how little employees sometimes realise the standards expected of them. So starting with the contract, the express terms in the contract leave us in no doubt about the terms and conditions an employee is employed under. There are often specific standards outside the role of the contract. Some contracts incorporate targets and benchmarks, and keeping those fair and reasonable and update as the role changes. And some targets are not incorporated into the contract. They may be discretionary. So careful about saying discretionary if you give them the same bonus or commission every year without being tied to performance or objectives, as they're harder to vary. It's key to have objectives and job descriptions, and we often say that a job description isn't part of a term of a contract so that it can be flexible. And with the probationary period, it's great to have a probationary period. It's useful, although an employer does have an ability to dismiss an employee up to 2 years, so that they can't claim unfair dismissal. But the probationary period is very useful in focusing the mind on the review throughout and at the end of the probationary reviews. And it's also a good tip to put in a probationary period, perhaps when you promote, as it allows a business to retain the right to put an employee back to the former position without a legal issue. So monitor the performance over the probationary period, as well as explaining policies and procedures, keeping those up to date, and people understand the standards. And also I find explaining at induction about attitudes, personalities of key team players, the ethos of the organisation, expectations, of course the job function and objectives, but managers often fail to explain those wider issues. And so with induction, it's important to build in those review meetings, training and support. So Bananarama got it wrong when they said it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, that's what gets results. When it comes to being a good employer, what you do and the way you do it, that's what gets results. So when poor performance strikes, the first thing to consider is it conduct or capability? Is an employee willfully underperforming or not equipped to do it? Incapability, they're trying their best and not performing. I think of that as can't. Or conduct, not exercising their talent. I think of it as won't. So I prefer can't or won't. So, for example, an employee might be failing to build good relationships with clients because they can't be bothered, or they lack confidence. Won't his conduct, can't his capability. So the tribunals will look at the employers and look at how they deal with performance issues. Are they using misconduct with a disciplinary procedure when they should be going through performance management? And I appreciate that sometimes it's unclear. If there is poor performance, it's important to nip it in the bud, have a quiet word. Often it's ignored, and it causes problems if it's left to fester. It can lead to anger and resentment amongst colleagues. It can peak at team bonus time when the underperforming employee gets the same results. And it's much more difficult to dismiss if we've not dealt with it, and employers should be giving employees who are not performing a chance. Often employees get complacent. Sometimes all they need is a nudge in the right direction. And that's when appraisals and interim reviews really come into their own. The good ones are worth their weight in gold. And I often say to clients, invest in your appraisals, train your managers, make good appraisals a KPI of your managers too. Be careful about managers not tackling issues in appraisals. I see enough appraisals which are very woolly. When it comes to dealing with performance management, there's no evidence to base a company concern on. And don't forget to acknowledge the good stuff. The best appraisals should be fair, accurate and balanced. Tribunals won't appreciate overly critical appraisals. And often it's how we conduct those appraisals, looking at the balance between interim reviews and the yearly appraisal. And short interim reviews, perhaps after a project or a piece of work, they're much more meaningful. And remember to mark in a calendar the end of a probation so it doesn't roll over without a review. Or sometimes the 6 months, 12 months, so we're aware to assess. We don't get to 2 years without being sure. Looking at the process, I tend to focus on what we might need to show at an employment tribunal. It helps me to work backwards. As already said, we identify whether it's conduct or capability, whether it's a disciplinary or performance procedure. If managers skirt around performance issues, it's much harder to enforce it as a capability issue later. And sometimes I appreciate it's hard to put your finger on the key issues in performance management. It could be, is that person fitting in? Have they got business acumen, common sense? It might be very difficult to show in black and white. But if they've worked for 2 years and we can't put our finger on an issue, but we've not dealt with it, then a tribunal will be very sceptical if we dismiss them after 2 years. Often that's when settlement agreements come in at this point. And training and support, of course, play a big part in performance management. So with the procedures, we tend to start with a quiet word, informal discussion, keep notes, look at what training we need, what support, and if no improvement, we may need to go on to the next stage of looking at investigation. We listen to the employee, try and read between the lines. For example, an employee might blame a manager, favouring someone else over them. Look at what other explanations there may be for poor performance. Are they struggling with their home and work life? Are they struggling with IT or training or taking on too many responsibilities? And keep the employee open in this open dialogue. So the option we may draw it to the process to an end, or we may need to move it on and be specific about why that employee is underperforming. Give examples and evidence. Don't just say you've got an attitude problem. A tribunal will not appreciate that. You'll need to say there was an attitude problem on the 17th of April. You said to your colleague, etc. And setting out the standards you expect, pointing to that contract, the clause and policies, and what you might need to help. Training or targets might need adjusting. And your outcome, it might be nothing. It might be we need to give an improvement letter, and we often give an improvement letter or letter of concern, setting out, it's not necessarily a formal warning, it's just setting out the standards we expect. We may need to give a formal warning, look at additional support, and then review. How long do we need to review? And this might take into account the seriousness of the performance or what the account of the length of service of that employee. And it's not a time for the employer to take their foot off the pedal. We need to supervise during review. It's also worth thinking about whether we need to demote that individual at any point or transfer to another job. But we can only do that if the contract allows you to do so. So really, we expect you to have an initial investigation type meeting. That might come to the end. That might be the end of performance management. We may need to do a formal performance management review and monitor over a period of time. Then we might need a second performance management meeting if there's, again, no improvement, and again monitor. And at that point, we may need to consider dismissal if there's no improvement. So it's a bit like a three-step process, a bit like a disciplinary procedure in that respect. And we refer to the ACAS Code of Practice on disciplinary and grievance procedures, and following that code, and also on the ACAS website, they've got quite useful guides on performance management. So looking really in summary, we've got employers shouldn't lose sight of why performance management is there in the first place. It's about improving company performance. And it's good to be able to use that tool to help fill skill gaps and improve productivity and get the best out of an employee. And check we've got job descriptions and objectives, and that contracts are up to date and policies, and that we take our induction process seriously. And not for our managers to be scared to raise performance issues, and not just to rely on the annual review, but consider perhaps a short interim review. Be aware to acknowledge the good things. And if we do have to put an employee into performance management, tell the employee we're not interested in a temporary improvement, and be specific. Get to the heart of the issue. So thank you very much. I'm conscious that we've got the new General Data Protection Regulations coming into effect in May 2018, and that's the most widespread changes to data protection for 20 years. And that's how we hold all this personal data and how we process it for employees and employers. We can help if you need any assistance with that, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That was really, really informative. We have had quite a few questions come through, but before we do go on to the questions, we've got another question for the audience, and then we'll come back to you, Caroline, if that's okay. So I'm going to ask you again, audience, if you could give us your opinion. If you complete or have a performance review, do you agree objectives for the next one? Now, the answers here are rarely, sometimes, it depends, and always. So if you complete or have a performance review, do you agree on objectives for the next one? Does this happen rarely? Does it happen sometimes? Does it happen, it depends on the circumstances, or does it always happen? We've got about 85% of you voted. I'll give you another couple of seconds if you could click your button and have your say. Okay. Let's have a see what you said. So if you complete or have a performance review, do you agree objectives for the next one? 14% of you said rarely, 14% of you said sometimes. There's a pattern for me. 14% of you said it depends. Now 57%, which is great because that's over half, said that they always agree on objectives for the next performance review, which is nice to know. But it's certainly, in my opinion and in my experience, it's something that should happen to allow you to actually have something to aim for. Okay, so I'm going to go on with the questions for Caroline. We've had a few, and thank you very much, everybody, for popping those through. Caroline, we've had a question. Do you think performance is the right term, or can personal development review be better in some cases? Sometimes the team are nervous of the word performance, even though that's clearly part of the process. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yes, absolutely. Whatever term you think will work for your particular company or industry. We do use different terms, and so sometimes it can be seen as very much the employee feels very pushed down by that term. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very good point there. Actually, sometimes just the title of something can change its appearance straight away. We have a question: should records be kept when feedback, whether it's good or whether it's improvement needed, is given between any formal reviews?
Yeah, I'd always say that it's useful to have records, and it's quite helpful. I don't know whether any of you have a particular performance template. That's quite helpful in that you can sort of set out areas of concern and get the employee's input on that form so that they feel like actually their input is noted and taken on board, and particularly notes, quick bullet point notes of what you discussed, perhaps feedback email to the employee to clarify, and definitely a note on the file, because sometimes when we look further on the process, there may be a different expectation of what was discussed.
Great. We have one here that's related specifically to frontline waste collectors, for example. This could be anybody that isn't in a one area of or workplace. This question is, do you have any tips for managing performance when it's not easy to get individuals in for a formal one-to-one?
I've done them on Skype. It's more helpful if you know, we can have that, see the body language.
Is there something that is it acceptable to do a review off the site of a normal sort of working environment? Would it be acceptable for you to go to them, for example?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And often it's where we can have that review where they're feeling more comfortable. Because sometimes actually, if you're dealing with people off site and they come into the main office, which they don't do very often, it makes them get their backs up. So even if you meet off site at third party place or a sort of hotel, coffee shop, to try and relax people is much more useful.
That's great. Thank you very much, Caroline. We do have a couple of other questions, but I am conscious of time going on. So if we have some time at the end, I will come back to a couple of the questions that we've got. But again, thank you very much, Caroline. We're actually going to move on to our next presenter, who is Maggie Newton from Red Clematis Coaching Services. Now, she's going to talk to us about DISC personality profiling. But before we pass over, we've got another question for you, audience. I told you we were going to keep you awake by asking you questions. So do tell us, are you able to have difficult discussions in your performance reviews? Now, whether you are undertaking it or whether you are on the receiving end of a performance review, do you feel comfortable asking or answering difficult discussions? Do you very rarely receive or do you very rarely have difficult discussions? Are you able to, but you find it difficult yourself? Or are you the sort of person that doesn't have a problem at all with difficult discussions? This one is making people think. I can see that people are starting to vote quite rapidly now. We've got just over half of you have voted. I'll give you another couple of seconds. So are you able to have a difficult discussion as part of a performance review? We've got over 3/4 of you have voted, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. So, very pleasingly, we have people that said that nobody has said they don't feel any difficulty with this. Some people have said they very rarely do this, around 5%. And from my point of view, I can totally understand and relate to the 74% of you that says that you're able to, but you find it difficult. And a very confident 21% of you don't have any problem at all having difficult discussions, which is very interesting indeed. Okay, so I'm going to pass you on now to our next presenter, Maggie Newton. Maggie is from Red Clematis Coaching Services.
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. So I'm Maggie Newton, Red Clematis Coaching, and I set up my business 3 years ago after 30 years in the corporate world. And my most recent employed stint was at an organisation called RAP, which I'm hoping some of you will be very familiar with. And I managed the organics programme there for 11 years. So I do know the industry quite well. And as a coach and facilitator, one of my roles is to build self-awareness. And DISC personality profiling is a great tool for this. So how can DISC help you? So DISC can help you understand behaviours, both your own and that of others. And it can make you more aware of your natural preferences, how you like to behave, how you like to act, as well as your strengths and weaknesses. So you can play to your strengths and dub down your weaknesses. And I found it a great tool. I'm accredited to use DISC by the Coaching Academy, and I use it quite a lot in workshops, working with individuals and teams and in coaching. And it's been great for my own self-awareness, because I understand a lot more now about, you know, why I behave as I do and what motivates me. And I like DISC because it's simple and easy to use, and actually it suits my personality style. And it's great for helping to build stronger working relationships. So a bit about DISC. So what we're going to do today is a very, very high level overview of DISC. There's a lot more to it than you'll see today, but a very brief background to it. The origins of DISC go back a long, long way. They actually go back to the Greek philosophers. But the modern DISC behavioural system was created by a chap called Dr. William Marston in the 1920s. And he was also known as the inventor of the lie detector test. And he grouped people along two axes, whether they were outgoing or reserved, and whether they were task or people orientated. And from this, he developed 4 main styles. So we have D for dominance, we have I for influencing, we have S for steadiness, and we have C for compliance. So what I'm going to do is just move on and tell you a little bit about the characteristics of each style, and then a little bit later on we're going to do a very high level poll just to see where you might think you fit in terms of those broad categories. And what I would say is that most of us tend to be a combination of categories. So it's very rare to find some who are completely D or completely I. Some of us can be a mix of 3. Very rarely you might find somebody who's a mix of all 4. But anyway, so moving on. So the first style is D for dominance, and Ds are outgoing and task orientated, and their core traits are the fact that they're very direct, they're usually very driven, they're very decisive, challenging, competitive, they like to lead, they're the movers and the shakers, and they're very forceful. And in some of the workshops I do, I liken them to the eagles. So if you can imagine eagle behavior. Now, Ds tend to be motivated by being in charge. They like challenge and they like power. And in terms of their fears, and it's the fears that very much, or the fears and the motivations that very much come into play when we're talking about performance reviews, are being taken advantage of and failure. Then we move on to our eyes. Now our eyes are our influencers, and they're very outgoing and people focused. And their characteristics are they're usually very inspiring. They like to influence and persuade, so they'll talk a good talk, they'll enjoy telling stories. They can be quite loud, talkative. They're the ones at a party or at an event you're probably more likely to hear and see above the others. They're very optimistic, friendly, enthusiastic. They have lots of ideas. They're very innovative, and they can be impulsive. And they very much are motivated by praise and recognition. They like to be told that they're doing a good job, and their fears are very much rejection or loss of popularity. Moving on to our S's, or the S is characterized by steadiness. They're reserved and people focused, and their traits are that they're very loyal, they're very patient, reliable, sincere. They're very much the team players. They like harmony within the team. They like routine, and they're very, very good listeners. And they're motivated by security. So they don't like change. They like to be recognized for their loyalty and for starting and finishing. And their fears are very much change and loss of security. So in a scenario whereby maybe there's going to be lots of change, they would feel quite uncomfortable unless it was fully explained and they knew the reasons why it was happening. And then finally, we have our C styles, so compliance, who are again reserved and task orientated. And our Cs tend to be quite cautious. They like to comply with rules and regulations. They're very organized. They like accuracy. They love detail. They're very much the perfectionists. They have very, very high standards, and they're very thorough with their work. And they're motivated by systems and procedures and by doing a good job, so the quality of their work. And in terms of their fears are very much criticism and conflict. They don't like conflict.
Well, we've got a poll for you halfway through the presentation now. What we're actually going to ask you, and we can't see who you are and how you answer. However, what we are going to do is ask you, what personality type do you think you're most like? So which of the following personality profiling or team development tools? Oh, I beg your pardon, I'm asking you the wrong question. I tell you what, let's see if I can find the right one. I'm going to ask you this one first, and then we'll pop another one in a moment. I do apologise, Maggie, that's completely my fault. Which of the following personality profiling or team development tools have you used in your organisation or are you familiar with? I do like to throw in a curveball now and again. So obviously Maggie's told us about DISC today, but there's some others down there. Myers-Briggs, Belbin, any other, and if you've used any other, if you could pop the answer in the question box, we'd be very pleased. And if you're not familiar with any personality profiling tools, just click the bottom one there. Now, 77% of you have, more than 80% of you have voted, which is very nice. I'm going to give you a second more, and then I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you. So there you go. Let's have a look. 6% of you have heard of DISC, 44% have heard of Myers-Briggs, 17% have heard of Belbin. Some of you have heard of other. So if you could type what the other type that if you can remember what it was, just type that in the question box and we can have a look at that. And quite a lot of you are not familiar with any personality profiling tools at all. So I should imagine today's been very useful for you. So thank you very much for that. I'm actually now going to try and find the right poll question for you. They say the best laid plans. Here we go. Let's have a look. Which personality type do you think you're most like? Here we go. Now this is the one I should have asked you. We've just heard about all the 4 personality types. Which one do you think you are? D, dominant, driven and direct. I, influencing, enthusiastic and friendly. S, steady, loyal and patient. C, compliant, cautious and detailed. I know when I was looking through them as Maggie was reading them out, I'm thinking, oh yes, that's such a body, and oh yes, that's such a body. So you let me know which one you think you are. Again, we don't know what you're voting. Let's have a see how you're feeling. More than 80% of you have voted, so I'll just give you a couple more seconds. There we go. So which personality type do you think you are most like? Well, 32% of you are dominant, driven and direct. 47% of you are influencing, enthusiastic and friendly. 11% consider yourselves steady, loyal and patient. And 11% consider yourselves compliant, cautious and detailed. Well, that's very interesting indeed. And no, it's nice to see that everybody has sort of chosen something. We haven't got, apart from having a few more influencers up there, we've got quite a good spread. Okay, Maggie, I'm going to hand back over to you for the rest of your presentation.
Lovely. Well, that's really interesting because the biggest sort of percentages, so 32% Ds and 47% Is, mean that you're obviously quite an outgoing bunch, which is good to hear. So, and the highest mix are Is for influencing, and it's quite interesting because my personality profile, I'm actually an ID combination. So. Right. So how can DISC be helpful when it comes to performance reviews? This is all very nice, but how can you actually use it when it comes to performance reviews and appraisals? Well, DISC very much supports giving feedback, coaching, and building stronger working relationships. So if you can identify your own style and that of your team member, then you're going to be able to deliver feedback in a way that registers and connects. You're going to be able to communicate using their language. You're going to be able to set motivating goals, and you're going to be able to anticipate any reactions or fears or concerns. And, you know, think about appraisals both up and down the line, so how you approach them with your own line manager as well as for your direct reports. And so I just wanted to spend the last couple of minutes of my presentation just potentially highlighting things from a manager's perspective, giving an appraisal, and then from an employee perspective, sort of going into an appraisal. So if you're primarily what I call a D-style manager, then when you deliver your performance reviews, your approach is going to be quite direct. You're going to very much focus on whether the results have been achieved or not, rather than how. They're likely to be quite short. You're unlikely to praise or say well done, and you're likely to be wanting to move on to the next thing quite quickly. If you've got quite a bit of I in your personality style, then you're going to be really enthusiastic in your performance appraisals. You're going to give a lot of praise, a lot of recognition. You need to be careful though that you're not seen as insincere and that the feedback is meaningless, because sometimes if you overpraise, it can come across as meaningless. You're also unlikely to be interested in the detail. As a manager with some S traits, you're going to be very supportive and encouraging. However, you're going to want to avoid conflict or upsetting anyone. So you may avoid specific issues and you may be over lenient of poor performance. As a C manager, you're probably likely to put off doing your reviews as long as possible because you find that people interaction a bit harder. You'll very much want the detail, and you'll want to be reassured that the job is completed and that the procedures have been followed. Now, if you're on the receiving end, what's going to motivate you? So again, if you've got a lot of D within your personality type, then you're going to want to know that you're hitting the target. You're also going to you'll be motivated by new challenges and a role where you can lead. And what you won't want to feel is that you're being taken advantage of. So you won't want to hear that you're going to get a lot of additional work to do, because then you might feel that you're being taken advantage of. As an I personality type, you're going to be motivated by praise and recognition. You'll want to hear that you're doing a good job, that you exceeded expectations, and you'll want to have new projects which are going to get you infused, excite your creativity and innovation. So give somebody a role where they can generate ideas and be the centre of attention, but not necessarily where you want somebody to actually complete them. Then for an S personality style, they're going to be motivated by really genuine and sincere appreciation. They want to be thanked for their hard work and support. They want to know they've made a difference to the team. Now, you may find in terms of feedback for them that they need to speak up more in meetings, because they're going to be the quieter ones who will sit back and let the others talk. So feedback might be they need to be a little bit more assertive, be more decisive and more open to change. If there's change afoot, you'll need to explain that fully and make the reasons for the change very clear. And finally, your C team member will want details. What exactly did they do right? What can they improve on next time? Walk them through their project and highlight the specifics. Be really attentive to detail and show that you understand the quality of their work. And above all, avoid criticising them. So that's a whistle-stop tour of DISC personality profiling and how you can use that in performance appraisals. I do offer full DISC profiles and team development programs that use DISC. So again, there'll be further information on those at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maggie. That was incredibly interesting. And I'm not going to share with you which one I think I am, but I think I fit absolutely squarely into one box. We have got some questions for you. One of the questions was, can someone change their personality type over time? Or does basically, if you're that personality type, that's what you stick with?
No, you can very much change it over time. And also, a lot of us will find we're a different personality type at work than we are at home. So when you do the questionnaire, you pick a scenario, you pick whether you're assessing yourself at work or you're assessing yourself at home. And yes, you can change over time. I used to have a lot more S in my profile when I worked as part of a team at RAP, for example. But you know, since I've been working for myself, I have a lot more D in my profile.
Right. Now, yes, that's very interesting if you've got that kind of mix. And actually, that leads on nicely onto the next question. There's a question come in that says, do you think it's better to have a mix of types in a team or put people with teammates with similar personalities to avoid conflict?
I think it depends on what you want to do. So it's always good to have a mix of different types for balance. But let's say, for example, you know, you're working on something, let's say it's a new project, you might want to then have a good mix of eyes in your team to get the ideas and the creativity. You'd also want some S's and some C's to make sure that the project was delivered, and you know, possibly a couple of D's to make sure that they were still focusing on the results and the completion, and they weren't getting taken too off track and distracted. So, you know, the answer is it's horses for courses, really. It depends on the specific project or the nature of the work that the team has to do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Maggie. We are going to move on. As I said, that I don't want to risk running out of time. I'd rather have more time at the end and we can come back to some questions. So I am actually going to move on. And we're going to go across to Maggie Clinton at Wrenwell Health and Wellbeing, and she's going to talk to us about managing pressure to improve performance. So Maggie, I'm going to hand over to you. Hello, Maggie. I don't know if you can hear me.
Sorry there, I just had a little bit of problem with my microphone. So.
Lovely, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Yes, my name is Maggie, also Maggie Clinton, very confusing. And I'm a founder and director of Wrenwell Limited. And we are specialising in providing health and wellbeing for the workplace. So as an occupational therapist, my specialism has been mental health, and really looking at trying to support people when they're feeling the pressure of life. I've worked in acute situations and now working very much with corporate companies to try and get to the point where we are reducing reactions to stress and pressure. So this afternoon I'm looking at how we can manage pressure to actually improve performance and how that can be a part of the performance review. So just moving to the next slide.
I think we've got a little bit of a problem with your sound, Maggie. Are you still there?
Hi, Ria. Yes, I'm back.
You're still there. That's great. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that. So just really to recap on this slide, yes, we're all aware that pressure can positively improve performance. And this is something we're going to experience every single day. So with regards to focus, when we have a response to pressure, our body enhances or really sharpens our focus. So that can be all of our senses and our ability to actually get a job done. Pressure can also help us to increase and build our resilience. So the main elements of resilience are strength, that sturdiness, that solidness that we have. It also really depends on our flexibility and also our ability to bounce back. So we're pulling on all the skills that we've had, and we're also learning new skills when we're put under pressure. And in doing so, we're able to build on our courage and push those boundaries, which helps us to improve our self-esteem, that real sense of achievement that we get when we've worked our way through something that's been quite difficult. And also working within a team as well. So we're not isolated, we're not working alone. So we're really looking at our teams when we're wanting them to perform better, to look at what are the different skills, reflecting what Maggie's told us, what are those different personalities that really help to support each other and are very good at a different range of skills. So pressure is an important part of the working day, and it's really important to understand when pressure is actually becoming something of a problem. So when does pressure turn into stress? So when we are feeling pressure, we're going to experience a lot of stress. And again, this is a part of our day. So when does it actually turn into something that's uncomfortable and something that actually starts to impact upon our performance? So that, as Caroline was saying, when does it turn into I can't do the job? When does it become a capability issue that we've got so much pressure we're not able to manage, we're not able to perform? So the Health and Safety Executive give us a definition of work-related stress, and they say here in this quote, it's the adverse reaction that people have to excessive pressure or other types of demand placed upon them. So as we all know with our life experience, it's when we don't have just one thing, it's a whole layering up, it's the excessive pressure, the demand that's placed upon us. So it's not actually an illness stress, but actually if stress is prolonged, it can become sort of a mental and physical issue, and this can develop into anxiety, it can develop into depression. It's also equally as important that we have enough stress. So if we have too few demands, we can actually become bored, feel undervalued, and lack recognition. So if we feel that we have a task and it's pushing us to just the right challenge, we'll perform really, really well. If we've got a task and we're not able to manage that task, we'll start to feel stressed and underperform. So just moving on to our next slide. The Health and Safety Executive provides 6 main elements that define really what can assist management in managing work-related pressure and stress. So if you can put in place positive management of these elements, then you'll be able to improve individuals' performance. So these are based for a guideline for organisations, but I rather like these as something that we can look at as individuals. So when we have a look at our role at work, managing those demands, and also there's various elements there that tie in quite nicely with what Caroline was saying. So when she was saying that looking very clearly at job descriptions and objectives and sorting out those employee contracts right from the start, it makes it very clear for us what our role is. So then when we come to review, if we feel that our role is growing and putting too much pressure on us, there is an opportunity for us to have a discussion about that, review that. Is that a capability issue? Also having a look at the control that we have on the demands that are put upon us. If we have regular reviews, as Maggie was saying, we're able to give feedback on what it is that we feel that we can cope with, what are the things that we don't have control on. We're also looking at the support that we have in place, so that's having a good induction process, it's having those balanced appraisals, and having a constant review gives us an opportunity to highlight the things that we're not coping with. One of the questions earlier on was saying, should we make a note of things informally? I think as bosses and as individuals, as employees, line managers, HR, we really need to make a note of issues that come up if they're stress related, as and when they do, rather than necessarily waiting to a review and starting to put that support in place and have a conversation about it. So relationships also, and this drops very nicely into looking at the DISC personality profiling. We might not get on with certain individuals at work, and this might cause us to perhaps not perform as well as we'd like to. We may be intimidated by somebody or feel that somebody's not working at the speed that we are. So relationships from a performance management point of view is all around sort of coping with people's differences and enabling them to build good work relationships so they can work alongside each other. Change also is something that causes a lot of distress for people. So we're really looking to find ways of how to inform people about change. So it's making sure that they, as a group, are well aware of what the change is going to be, how timely they are, what they will involve. Some people will need more detail, whereas others will really want to just go through and deal with the changes as they occur. So as we say, stress isn't currently recognised as a mental health condition, but if we can manage pressure, we can reduce performance deficits and capability issues by managing these various elements.
Thank you very much. We're going to have another poll question partway through Maggie's presentation here. So I'm going to ask you another question. This is about wellbeing policy. So do you know, does your place of work have a wellbeing policy in place? Do you know, no, there is nothing in place for wellbeing? You don't know, or you're not sure, or you have an informal approach, or do you have a clear plan of support for health and wellbeing in your workplace? That's certainly something that we need to consider, so I'll give you a couple more minutes. Does your place of work have a wellbeing policy in place? So is it no, nothing in place at all? I don't know, or I'm not sure if we have anything in place. Yes, we have an informal approach, or yes, we have a clear plan of support for health and wellbeing. Well, thank you for voting. I'm going to share those results with you. Well, there's a really good mix there by the look of it. Disappointing to see that there's nothing at all in place for some people. Some people don't know, which also disappointing. You would hope if there wasn't something in place, it would have been communicated to you. And actually, that's the second highest of our results there. Yes, we have an informal approach. And also, yes, we have a clear plan of support for health and wellbeing. And that's, thankfully, that is the most popular choice. Well, I'm going to hand back to Maggie. I don't know if there's anything that you want to say about those results.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite a common response, actually, because I really don't know whether we have anything in place, because a lot of people don't really understand what is a wellbeing policy. And a lot of companies have got great things in place already, just as a very common sense approach, but don't identify it as such, as a wellbeing policy. So when it comes to creating an environment that helps us to improve our performance, it is really, from an occupational performance point of view, looking at what do we have in place that really helps us. So it is keeping it really, really simple. And when, as I say, when people think they don't have something in place, there could be a lot of very good things there already. So very recently, just to help us within the workplace identify what those things are, there has been this review of mental health within the workplace called the Stevenson Farmer Review. And this is called Thriving at Work. And the theory really is, as I say, very much a common sense approach of if we feel well, if we're able to manage the pressure, we understand that we're going to get pressure, it's going to feel uncomfortable at times. But if we have certain things in place, we're going to be able to manage those things more effectively. So Thriving at Work really gives employers an idea of how to put in place basically 6 mental health core standards, and that gives us a foundation to support mental health in the workplace. So the first thing is the mental health work plan, and people think, well, what is this? So it's basically a way of communicating good mental health for all employees. So we're not waiting until people are stressed and unwell. We're actually looking at things that are in place that actually promote good mental health. What is the support available? So do we have an employment assistance program in place? Do we have regular reviews? That's very much a part of mental health. Are we able to have meetings where we can share ideas, be creative? Are there things such as water available? Are we having regular breaks? Are we looking at inactivity and sedentary working? So anything really that could be set down into a more formal plan, you may already have that in place. So mental health awareness for employees. I think this is something that is far more common, and in this report, 24% of managers had received some form of training on mental health at work, which is very little. Seeing as a manager, you're dealing with pressure from above and pressure from managing your team. So I think the biggest feedback was that they really didn't feel that they had the right experience. They lacked either the skills or the training to effectively support people at a really basic level. So some mental health awareness for employees, including line managers, is a really helpful thing. And when it comes to the line manager responsibilities as well, we're looking at those responsibilities, making sure that jobs are clear, making sure our employees are supported, making sure that we're monitoring that performance. So when people are changing the ways that they're working, is that I won't do it, or is that I can't? What are the signs and signals? So if we have somebody who's normally quite outgoing, gregarious, suddenly that behaviour changes and they're more withdrawn. As a line manager, it's very important to take those changes seriously. If somebody's very confident and outspoken, and again, that changes, then we need to pick that up and recognise that. And as we go through all of those personality types, trying to look for the differences. So if somebody's normally quite quiet and quite subdued, are they a little bit more elated, outspoken, less inhibited, a little bit crosser? So we're looking for changes in mood that indicate that we're under stress, under pressure. So line manager responsibilities: be informed, ensure that we've got good working conditions, and encourage those open conversations. So very much the informal approach. It doesn't have to be set down in a 6-month review. How are you coping? How are you doing? How are we managing the load this week, today? Okay. So monitoring staff health and wellbeing can sit really nicely into those performance reviews. And asking individuals, or we as individuals, preparing for our own reviews, saying these are the elements that I found difficult, these are the pressures that I found that made me feel uncomfortable, these are the things I think would help. So just moving on to the next slide. Bear with me. You can just move me on, Ria. Thank you. So the things that we can do to act now. These are the things that, again, that we really need to keep simple. So these, bear with me. These are things such as, are we sitting for too long? Are we not getting up, standing and stretching? Are we hydrating enough? And are we eating the right things? If we're under pressure, if we're starting to feel quite stressed and anxious, what we really need to do is to take some time out. So going forward, it's trying to identify what you have in place, recognise those good things and understand to keep it simple. Also to have a review of performance and consider those wellbeing assets that you already have in place. You perhaps would like to put in a wellbeing event or educate your teams. So some of the simplest things that we can do to educate our teams would be to manage that pressure and stress, try and build resilient skills, perhaps introduce some mindfulness or some stretch exercises, encourage individuals to improve their sleep and have a look at how much we use those devices, and also perhaps introduce some ways of how to manage our energy levels through the things that we eat, that hydration and the food. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Maggie. That was certainly some food for thought and some great tips there as well. I have a couple of questions for you, but certainly one that a couple of people have asked actually. How do you go about having a conversation or in a review, perhaps with your manager, or perhaps your manager having a review, having a conversation with you about mental health issues, whether that's work or non-work related, without them thinking it's about your lack of competence?
Absolutely. I think that when we're concerned about somebody, if we, from a manager point of view, feel that health has changed, we need to be actually very clear. As Caroline was saying before, we can't just say, oh, I think you've been rudely behaved. We need to be more specific and make a note going forward on, was the individual late consistently? Had they changed in the way that they responded to something? And being quite accurate, so saying, yes, on Tuesday afternoon, we noticed you were late back from lunch, and we've noticed this for a little while, and that's not like you to be like this. It doesn't have to be an informal review. Often when we're sitting down opposite somebody, that can be quite intimidating for both parties. So perhaps a more informal approach, where that's saying, come on, let's go for a walk, have a cup of tea together, just as the starting of the conversation, saying, we've been concerned because, an accurate detail of A, B, C. rather than just saying, oh, I've got a feeling you're not so well at the moment. Alternatively, if you're concerned about your own health or well-being, or even a colleague's, because we don't often recognise it in ourselves, that might be worth as well a very informal conversation, such as how you're getting on, how are things going. So we're not actually asking directly at first, just to start off.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I'm sure that answered everybody's question very, very succinctly there. I've just got one last question for you, and this is, I think it's looking for hints and tips. Is there anything that we can do to help reduce our stress on a day-to-day basis? For example, if we feel overly stressed at a specific moment, so presuming that they don't mean that it feels all stressed all the time, it could be that we've got a specific task and it's making us feel quite stressed. What can we do to help that?
Right, absolutely. What happens when we start to get stressed is we have a response to that. So our heart rate will increase, we'll change how we breathe, so shorter breaths or even breath holding, and we'll start to think more rapidly and not often very helpfully. If we're starting to identify that, then the first thing is to just check how you're breathing. Are you breath holding? Are you taking short breaths? Try and stand up if you can do. I always say, even if people are in meetings, stand up. And if you feel you a little bit overwhelmed, leave the room. Just say, excuse me for one moment, and take a step out. Fresh air is a great thing. Lovely deep breaths. Going up and down some stairs is another thing. Helps to relieve the tension and helps the heart rate just steady itself. Just trying to clear the mind. Dry mouth, also go and get some water. Spend a penny. Just a change of environment, a change of temperature. Regulate that breathing. So that's the first 3 minutes. Then try and have some time alone, or go and talk to somebody. So that would be my first 3-minute plan.
That's very good advice indeed. I think that's something that we can all take away and would be quite easy to put into place, and without it being conspicuous, because I know that I certainly don't like to, I don't think any of us like to admit if we're feeling stress or under pressure. So that's some really great tips that we can put in place there. Thank you.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Marvellous. Well, thank you very much to all of our presenters today, to Maggie Newton from Clematis, Caroline Robertson from ActifHR, and to Maggie Clinton from Wrenwell. That has been a really, really interesting presentation with all of those, the things that we've talked about, really interlinking, certainly thinking about performance management or development reviews, and those personality profiles and how you would be able to help those with that. But also that managing pressure, I think it's down to us all to recognise not just pressure in ourselves, but also in our colleagues as well. So once again, thank you very much for your time today, everybody. You will receive video and audio of the slides in an email. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you at our next event. Don't forget to complete the brief pop-up survey when you leave. There are only 5 questions and your opportunity to give us your opinion. Thank you.